for someone who you point out in the early 1950s that these were not message films. These were that other people made message films, but Navketan was not making messages and followed the Hitchcockian policy that, if you want a message, you go to the post office. But by the time we have Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, there is a very moral Devanand character saying, do not make Ram's name Badnaam, and Janice, you must come back to being Jasveer. And, kind of towing a patriarchal, old-fashioned values kind of person.
Yeah, that really surprised me a bit because if you see Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, he's caught that moment, the hippie moment, which lasted for about 2 years. After that, it began dissipating. And he's caught it perfectly. The hippies are real people, by the way. They are not film extras. And he's caught it. But I think somewhere he must have realized that even suggesting that this freedom lifestyle is good. Remember, the hippies were disturbing Indian middle classes. Who are these naked fellows who are prancing in the streets, taking drugs? We don't want them. Pack them off. They were landing up here, or they were landing up in Kathmandu. Kathmandu is much freer. You could buy drugs. Or occasionally some went to Kulu, Manali and all. So Indians were getting jittery about this, type of strange animal that was coming into India. I think he must have thought that, I don't know whether middle age had anything to do with it, but he must have thought that this was getting too much now. These people were threatening to upset a particular status quo of the family values. So the family values message is definitely strong in that, something that wasn't particularly there in his earlier cinema.
So I wonder about are there several Devanands? And this each decade seems to have an independent, almost hermetically sealed Devanand who isn't like the next decade's Devanand.
You could argue that because the subaltern of the 50s gives way gives way to the bourgeoisie, architect first, cop next, army officer after that in the 60s, and then later on starts doing all kinds of other things and maybe becomes a little moralistic. He's got a family. I think he's acknowledging now, I'm finally getting old, I must have a wife. He doesn't have a wife, but till the early 70s it's all about him being a cool photographer and all that. There could be that thing that he was also evolving. But remember, come the 70s, there's another big problem that's happening. He's caught in a very strange mind, and everyone's caught in a strange mind, young, old, middle-aged, everybody. And that's Amitabh Bachchan. And then in the 50s, he does crime films, and he's considered, somebody who's making slightly B-grade cinema. Not B-grade, but not really, the best. And then this comes along this man who makes crime films and violent films, and he's considered a hero.
So there's that game changer. There's another, there are two other game changers that, that he confronts. One is Shami Kapoor, who brings kind of, the Devanand we see has a trace of almost the effete, the kind of like throwaway, urbane. And then comes Shami Kapoor, who is in your face, masculine.
Animistic.
Testosterone driven. And then comes Amitabh, who takes that to another level where, the woman becomes completely dispensable and it's an entirely homosocial order. If you say subaltern, I'll say homosocial. You'll fill this with like really hot terms and everyone will buy the book, including the academics.
The subaltern word has not been used even once in the book, so you're free to buy it.
Okay, so the question is, at the end, you obviously really like this guy. You've grown to respect and admire your subject.
Well, I grew up with him, yes, and there are associations also.
Right, but there's points of time when you meet the person that you've grown up with and then he turns out to be a scumbag. But in this case, you really like the guy you've met off screen as well. But it's a sad end.
It is a sad end because they did not care about the institution. It became too self-centered. He became a little bit of a caricature. I have tried to dismiss the last 20-25 years in one chapter because I knew that they were not even worth discussing, but it had to be recorded. and otherwise it would have looked, incomplete in some ways. So it is a sad end, but the coda, as it were, is that this 88-year-old dies far away. People have stopped seeing his films for 20-25 years, and then there is an outburst of nostalgia about a man who gave this positive, optimistic, forward-looking message to a country which is sort of in that frame of mind in some ways. The youngsters today are not really worried about the past, and this man always talked about "Main zindagi ka saath nibhata chala gaya." Move forward. We can forget the "Har fikr ko dhuएं mein udata chala gaya." And I was amazed at the outpouring of grief for him. But mainly, what I'd like to say is that writing a book about Hindi cinema, my first attempt, Jerry has written several, is at one level quite easy because there is so much out there. At another level, very difficult because there's nothing serious out there. Indian film people do not know how to talk and explain what they've been doing. They just do it instinctively. So I was very fortunate because everyone I spoke to had something wonderful to contribute. Frankly, without the protagonist of this story, this book just wouldn't have been written.
Line up in orderly fashion. Do not riot, do not tear clothes of Sidharth Bhatia's comely body, and acquire a copy of your book and get it signed. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you.